Hey guys, welcome back to Crafts Go Bloom. My name is Krista and I am in full market prep mode. And today we're going to be talking about how I use up my scraps to make more out of the yarn that I have. Currently, I'm making things to fill this laundry basket, and then once I fill my and everything I've crocheted, they'll all go in that tote. So I am trying to use up my yarn wall, but you know how you end up with like a bucket full of scraps at the end. So I have a bucket down here full of scraps, and then I have to figure out things to do with them. I'm sure we've all been there. I'm also going to be trying to convince you that you shouldn't get rid of your scraps, and here's why you should keep them. Number one item on my list is chicken combs, and number two is chicken beaks. I was just touching the wrong thing. Right? This is a chicken comb. This is a chicken beak. I've made these before. I know what animals look like. This chicken comb, this chicken beak is only 4 stitches big. It only takes me like yay much yarn. Now that's not a perfect example and each person is going to use their own, but I can tell from like a strip of yarn that's less than 2 feet long probably that I'll be able to get a chicken beak out of it. I also have sort of figured out how much yarn, it's a little bit longer because this is more stitches, but I figured out how much yarn I need to make chicken combs. So I will keep little balls of red yarn when I'm done making crabs or whatever I'm making with the red, and I can get quite a few chicken combs out of them. And then if I'm throwing away yarn at the end, it's just tiny scraps that I really could not figure out anything else to do with. Next up on my list is cat whiskers. My cat pattern, I like to just cut one long piece of yarn and use it for the whiskers, the noses, and the ears. And I sell these cats in a variety of colors. These girly colors sell really well for me. So I do usually like a contrasting color from the body to the face details. I can use scraps of just about any color as long as I think it looks cute with the main body yarn to use those scraps up. Up next is turtle shells. Now, this particular turtle that I have made here is from just a variegated yarn, so I'm not actually showing you a scrap one, but I promise you I do make these out of scraps all the time. I think this works for land turtles or sea turtles, provided that the head and the body and the feet or the fins are all the same color green. As long as like the main body is one color, then I feel like you can get away with any color shell. A lot of my customers actually prefer the interesting looking ones. Up next is little color changes like this white stripe that goes around the center of this mallard. You could also add in bird feet in any of my bird patterns as a little pro tip there. This little stripe happens on quite a few different animals, or with bees when you have to do like the black stripe around a bee, you can save your scraps and use it for that. Up next, I have embroidering eyelashes and mouths, and I have an example where I stuck some eyelashes and mouths on this ice cream cone. This pattern is by Katie Being Creative, but you can also embroider eyes. I don't like to embroider eyes. It's not a great skill that I have, but there are quite a few tutorials out there on how to do it, and they do look really nice. I'd highly suggest checking out Mama Made Minis. They have quite a few snugglers that they do embroidered eyes on so that they're safer for littler kids. Up next is noses. Almost all of my sitting guy, sitting animal patterns have some sort of nose like this. And in this pattern, it happens to match the bobble feet, which would still be a pretty small scrap size. A lot of my patterns, you just need like a little bit of a nose, and so you only need like maybe 12 inches or so. Another example of a scrappy nose would be the nose on my sitting cow pattern, both the pink part of the nose and the black that I use to tie it on. And then some scrap busting patterns I have. For starters, I have this tree frog pattern. This pattern comes in 4 sizes, and you can weigh out your yarn scraps and see how many ounces they are. On just like a regular cheap kitchen scale from Amazon, you can weigh out your scraps and know approximately if you can make the small, medium, large, or extra large tree frogs. And this is a 4-pack pattern. Up next is going to be keychains of any variety, really. This is Crochet Grove's bee keychain pattern that my daughter loves to make. Another great thing for scraps is using up your white to make bee wings. And then I wrote this little like miniature keychain sitting chicken pattern that's not out yet. I also have this other chicken keychain pattern. You can find it on my website, you can find it on YouTube, and it's free over on Instagram. and it's also got the weight measurements, so I know how much Bernat blanket I can use to make one of these. So I weigh out my scraps in chicken colors and usually make these up. A couple of pointers about using scrap yarns. I've got 2 skeins of yarn here, and let's pretend they were just 2 small scraps and I'm making something like a turtle shell. I will literally just tie these 2 ends together and knot them a couple of times. I usually do like 4 knots going kind of like back and forth so that it's really strong. And then I just crochet along here, pull this down inside the project and keep crocheting. If you're doing a stitch where it looks like this is about to pop through, I just use my finger, hold it down and keep going, and it will create like a loop in the back. Now that loop can still be pulled through if you know exactly where to pull on the plushie. So as I'm going along, I just fold this over, keep crocheting, and I crochet through that loop in my next stitch so that it just really tightens it down. But that is how I create the colorful turtle shells and things like that. And I will tie together all sorts of scraps and just get like maybe 1 or 2 stitches out of some of them. So that's how I use the scraps to be tied together to make scrappy looking projects. However, one caveat is that you need to make sure it still looks good together. I don't do a lot of like high contrast colors tied one after the other, unless what you're going for is like, I'm going to make this thing out of all black and white scraps and it's gonna look like my shirt. And it's going to be intentional. I wouldn't tie together things that are just sort of a mishmash. I would put a plan to it. You could tie together an entire rainbow, but make sure it actually flows in a rainbow. And make sure that if you're making a plushie, you're likely going in rounds. So it might look nice as one big long string that you've tied together, but what's it going to look like by the time you start wrapping them and they start building on each other? So just be mindful of your color choices. I usually like to grab out a bunch of like greens, blues, and purples, and then a bunch of oranges and reds, and I tie them together in that way so that I know even if it looks a little splotchy, it's probably still gonna match. And one last thing I don't actually recommend is using your scraps as stuffing. The only way that I would recommend this is if you're using something like tied together nylons and you're making like a sack that goes inside of the plushie and all of your scraps are tied in there. I have watched my kids stick their fingers. It's kind of difficult for me because my hands aren't small enough and my stitches are tight enough. But if I tried hard enough, I could still find a tiny little hole in there. And I have seen too many little kids actually stick their hands inside of plushies, especially if your tension is not great. All those little scraps are just going to come out. The likelihood that those plushies are going to end up in the wash is so high if they are owned by a child. I don't want to give my customer something that could potentially fall apart or different colors are going to be sticking out of it. So those are all my tips on how to use up your scrap yarns. Leave a comment down below and let me know which pattern you would make first. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.